Glad to be here, and thanks for sticking around. I appreciate it very much. My name's Jeff Tolke. I'm CEO of Compaction Technologies. We're based up in Minnesota. My team and I put together some pretty cool technology for reducing wastes, improving sustainability, improving the guest experience, and improving the employee experience for people in fast food, quick serve restaurants, coffee houses, and a lot of other industries. Today, I want to talk to you about a subject that's pretty near and dear to everybody's heart, and you can't very much open up a magazine or read listen to a podcast or anything without hearing about employment and how hard it is to find people and how hard it is to keep people. It actually reminds me of a situation growing up. My dad was a farmer, and he also owned a grain cleaning business. And one of the jobs that he would hire high school kids to do is to come and clean grain bins. And it was by far the worst job in the operation. And if they did well at that and they hung in, then maybe they could get a better job, like, moving inventory or driving a forklift or something. But if they didn't prove themselves cleaning grain bins, they weren't going anywhere. And just to give you an idea what that's like, so the area that's black carpet, that's about the size of one of these grain bins. They're about 30 feet deep, and they had a little 8-inch hole right in the middle, okay? And they were on the second floor. So they'd open up that hole and the grain would all fall out, except when you got to a certain slope, then the grain wouldn't flow any longer. So you had about 4 to 5 tons of grain all around waiting to fall into this hole. So a couple guys would have to get shovels, jump down in there, and scoop all this grain to the middle. So it's dark, it's dusty, it's itchy. I mean, it was oats and barley, and I mean, it was nasty stuff. And you'd have to take you about 6 hours to shovel all that stuff to the hole, and it was awful work. And my brother and I got recruited. That's what Dad called it, recruiting. It was like, get your butts down there and start moving grain. And I was probably about 8 or 9 years old. And he and I worked down there till we left for school. And we used to always kind of say, I really wish, I can't wait till we leave. And the old man's got to crawl his butt down here and do this job because this really sucks. And we just kind of felt that would be really cool to have him. We could just see him crawling over the edge and coming down here and do it and cussing the whole way down. Well, fast forward 10 years and my brother goes to school. I'm getting ready to go to school, and we think, okay, the old man's finally met his match. He's gonna have his day down in the grain bin. And that old fart really showed us. He automated. He went and bought an augering system that went right in the middle, swept around a big old arm, and brought all that grain right to the middle. So what used to take 6 hours and was just a miserable job, now it took about 30 minutes. So it was a really difficult job that nobody wanted to do, and he had a hard time keeping people there, and so he automated. Well, that's, in a nutshell, what I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you today about automating a task that's one of the things that leads to a lot of people leaving your organizations. Back to the whole notion of being hard to find people and hard to keep people. Let's talk a little bit about why that's difficult in the restaurant and the coffee shop business, fast casual, pretty much anything in food service. Job function. One of the things that's really difficult is what you're asking those people to do. And included in those is one that's not a real sexy job, and that's called taking out the garbage. Now, in preparation for this discussion, I went online and I looked at how job postings talked about emptying the trash. So I looked one up, and it was for a crew member. And it talked about 9 different characteristics and things you needed to do. And not on there once was it listed you're going to take out the trash. And everybody knows that the entry-level people, they're the ones that are going to take out the garbage, right? But this operator chose not to talk about it. So I looked up another one. Same thing. They didn't say a word about emptying the trash. I thought, well, that's a little weird. Maybe it's just found a third, same thing. Big, long explanation, must be prompt and on time and have a good attitude and help customers and so on and so forth. But nobody said a word about taking out the trash. Now, why do you think that is? It's because everybody hates the job, right? I mean, for those of you that are in operations, if you raise your hand and say, hey, who wants to take out the trash? Nobody does, right? And for that matter, who do you want doing it? You want your best cook taking out the trash? No. How about your star manager, the person that's, keeping the operation? You want them Of course not. What about the most perky, young, bright-faced person you got working behind the counter? Do you want them taking out the garbage? Of course not. If you had your choices, nobody would do it. But that's just one of the nasty jobs that has to happen. Another thing that's working against you in the challenge to hire and retain people is turnover. And I'm going to read this so I make sure I got it right. But I read an article in the Business Insider in May of 2018, and it said in there that the QSR and fast casual restaurant industry turned over at 150%, and it was at a 25-year high. I later read an article the next August on CNBC that the cost of turnover was $2,000 per employee. And that's everything from placing the ad, interview time, recruiting, getting them on board, training them, onboarding, and then processing them out at the end of their work. So $2,000. So heavy turnover and pretty expensive. So those are a couple of the challenges that make it hard to find and keep people. Another one is labor, just the general availability of labor. It's not very high. In fact, unemployment's at a 20-year low right now. And I wish I could tell you that there's a whole bunch of 12 and 13-year-old kids that are going to grow up into that position, but they're not. The birth rate in this country is down, and it's steadily declining. The immigration rate is flat. So the issue of no labor, that's here to stay. There just won't be a bunch of labor to backfill these jobs. In fact, when you add all this together, hard to find people, high wages, high turnover, rotten job, it's not just a competition, it's a war. One of our biggest customers calls it a talent war. And so it's, how do you compete? What do you do to go get and keep people in a talent war? Well, here's a couple of suggestions. I listened to a podcast a couple weeks ago from Nick Kenner, who's the CEO of Just Salad, and he talked about their hiring strategy in his podcast, and he said, and I quote, "Attracting talent is not an issue for us because millennials and Gen Z want to work in front of customers," end quote. So they offered cool jobs. Then, he talked about how healthy their brand was, how sustainable their brand was, and that's great. And if you can offer that in your operation, great. But for a lot of people, they have to deal with nasty things like grills and fryers and taking out the garbage. So if you can offer a job that meets these characteristics, good for you. But for those of you that can't, you have to think of something else. So another thing you can think of is what just about everybody does to win the talent war, and that's throw money at it. High wages, that's what a lot of people do, and signing bonuses. All good things. Trouble with that is it might get them in the door, but will it keep them? Because here comes the next competitor down the road who's going to pay them a little more or pay them a higher signing bonus. And it's not really a sustainable advantage that you have that other people can't take away. So here's a thought. What about automating? What about automating some of those jobs? And I don't mean the easy jobs, the nice jobs like the ordering kiosk, but I mean automating one of the rotten jobs. And one of those rotten jobs is moving the trash around. How about automating that? Trash handling in QSR, fast casual, and coffee house industry is really in the dark ages. I mean, it hasn't changed in years. And if you think about it, it's just inefficiency is bred into it. Because what do? You put it on a schedule, right? Okay, we're going to dump the trash at this time, and then at this time, and then at this time. Oh, unless it gets full and overflowing, then you can go dump it. Well, that means people are either going to empty trash before it's full, or once it's already spilled over onto the floor and it's created a mess. So it's just not set up or designed very, very well at all. And it really kind of begs the question, I mean, I've talked a lot about trash, but how much time does your team really spend on it? And a lot of people don't look at the whole task in its entirety. They kind of look at little bits and pieces, but we should look at that all in its entirety. And before we go into an operation, we do what we call a baseline study. So this is a baseline study that we did for a suburban St. Paul, Minnesota fast food restaurant. It's about 1.7 million in sales. This was back in 2012. They did 75% of their volume via drive-through and 25% dine-in. Okay, so in this particular case, they had 5 main trash cans out in their dining room. They emptied them a total of 25 times. They took 25 bags out of their main 5 trash cans every day. They did 5 trash runs, and those trash runs took 30 minutes. Now when I say a trash run, what do I mean? I mean everything from the very beginning of the task to the very end of the task. So just work with me here, and here's kind of how it starts. So you got somebody behind the counter. It's time to dump the trash. Okay, I have to stop doing what I'm doing. I've got to walk over to where we store the Brute, the 32-gallon Rubbermaid drum on wheels, and I've got to roll that out now to the very first container. I got to open the door of the container. I got to pull the bin out, take the bag out, put it in the Brute, and I got to inflate a bag, put it in there, tie it off, roll it back in, shut the door. Now I walk at 2.2 feet per second, which is the industry standard. They travel about 1.5 miles an hour. 2.2 feet per second over to the next one, and the next one. I do that 5 times. Then I go out to the dumpster. I got to push it across the parking lot. I got to open the trash corral door. And I got to step inside, and I got to flip up the top of the dumpster lid, both of them, one at a time. Sling those bags in there. Then I have to put the lids down, get out of the corral, roll back to the origination place of the Brute. Then I got to go wash my hands and get back to my station. That took these people 30 minutes. And these aren't my numbers. I didn't stand there with a stopwatch. This was the owner. In fact, she was floored that it took them that long, because she'd been doing this for 30 years but never really looked at it in this context. So she automated. She automated her front of house trash handling. And what do I mean by that? Well, automating your front of house trash handling is where you install a guest-facing trash compactor. And most of the brands in the category have an automated door. So you present your tray, the door pops open, you drop the tray, you drop the trash inside of it, door shuts. After a few deposits, it goes through about a 9-second compaction cycle, so that instead of pulling out 8 bags of trash or 10 bags of trash, you pull out 1. Okay? So it's just reducing the number of times you dump the trash. It doesn't change the weight of the trash. It doesn't change the disposition of it, other than it just makes it denser, so you don't have to move it around as much. Okay? And it also means that instead of having 3 or 6 trash cans in your dining room, you now have 1 or 2. And it means that instead of having 12 to 24 empties a day, you now have between 2 and 4. And for your whole operation, instead of spending a total of about 2.5 hours a day doing nothing but handling and moving trash, you're now going to spend about 40 minutes doing it. Okay? And the all-in cost on this stuff is about $6 a day. All right? So that's what I mean by automating your trash. So you take that technology and you apply it back to the example I gave you before, and this is the differential. So they saved 458 trash bags in a month. And that amounted to, okay, $55. They saved 55 hours of dedicated labor, which is about $460 a month. Well, in 2012 dollars, in today's dollars, that'd be closer to $850. And they saved some money on their hauling. Now, the savings and everything were nice. But the big thing this did was gave her people something else to do, and it freed up their time to do the things she wanted them doing besides kind of a pointless project like managing trash. Now, we've been at this about 11 years, and we know it works. We know it works because we got proof. And our proof comes in the form of customer feedback. And one of those is for everybody that we work with that monitors their employee satisfaction scores, they see a difference. And they tell us, yep, satisfaction scores are up for employees because we don't have them doing a meaningless task. And that only makes sense, right? We hear all the time, my people love this. And probably my favorite quote is from a Chick-fil-A operator in Las Vegas who says, you know, I love my wife, but I love these trash compactors. And I think that's just kind of the sentiment that a lot of these customers have, because it's very intuitive technology and it really works well for them. The other forms of proof that we have is seeing the category growth. And our largest US-based customer authorized this technology about 30 months ago. And in that amount of time, half of their operators got on board. It was not a corporate mandate. It was strictly a voluntary optional thing, but these folks jumped on board, and they jumped on board quickly, and they're still jumping on board. The other evidence that we have that would suggest this is a growing category is outside of quick serve. We're seeing a lot of airports get on board, seeing some shopping malls get on board, because they all have the same issue. It's a thankless job, but it's got to get done, and it's very, very time intensive. And they find that by automating that job, their people want to stick around and do other things. So those are all nice things, but what does that really mean from a payback standpoint? Well, when you start looking at a return on investment from making something like this, let's look back at those numbers we talked about earlier, 150% turnover, $2,000 a head. So if you had an operation that had 10 positions and you turned over to 150% and it was all evenly spaced, you need 25 people per year to staff that operation, and each of them would work on average about 8 months. If by automating the front of house trash, you could get them to work from 8 months instead of 8, going 9 months, just extending one more month, you'd be able to reduce that headcount requirement from 23 to 25. And based on the $2,000 a head turnover we talked about earlier, that's $4,000. Well, that's more than going to pay for any front of house automation that you put in. So the math on it works out to be pretty good. The other thing is back to the job descriptions I talked about earlier. This would put you in a position where you could say, okay, in my operation, you only change the trash 3 times a day. Wherever else you go, you're going to be changing it 24. In my operation, you spend 40 minutes a day handling trash. You go work someplace else of the equivalent size, you're going to be spending 2.5 hours a day doing it. And instead of making 8 trips to the dumpster, you're going to make 1 per day. Now, if you employed that technology or deployed that technology, would that be something you'd want to bring up in an interview? I think you probably would. That's something you'd want to be transparent about. You'd want to tell your people that. And we find that a lot of our customers end up doing just that. It's a struggle hiring and finding people. It's, if not the biggest issue, it's arguably the biggest issue. It's not made any easier by the fact that employee turnover is high and it's very expensive and unemployment is extremely low and wages are high. But just know that there's technology available that'll allow you to automate one of the worst jobs in your operation that employees absolutely appreciate. Now, the show's over. We're going to leave our booth open for a little bit longer. If any of you would like to see it, we're in 1947. If you don't, and you've had enough of the show for one day, I would encourage you to go around and look at these operators in the New York area. A lot of these are downtown. Some of them are kind of out in the suburbs, but these are all operators that have deployed this technology. It's a short list. It's not everybody. They will do a much better job articulating to you the benefits that they see than I can, because they live it every day. All right. That concludes my comments. Any questions from you all? Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your attention. Have a great rest of the day.